All right, boys and girls, we are continuing our lesson on quadrilaterals. Today we're going to dig a little deeper. So I started off the lesson with giving you this page from your student activity book because this is going to be our reference page that anytime we get stuck today, we're going to go back and look at this one. So this one will help you refresh your memory and compare the relationship between one type of quadrilateral and another. So we can look at it and say, okay, quadrilaterals are a four-sided shape. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see most of your quadrilaterals, just like we said yesterday. Most of those quadrilaterals include parallelograms, rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. Trapezoids, it's a four-sided figure, are kind of separate from the other types of quadrilaterals because they have some unique things about them. And we talked about that yesterday. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start comparing them. Could this one be this one? Or can we switch it around and say that all rhombuses are parallelograms? Or all rectangles are squares? We need to start thinking today and applying what we know about these shapes. So this page is really important. Keep it open. If you need to, press pause, go back in the video, whatever you need to do to make sure you understand this. Another way to look at it is by this chart. I thought this chart might help some of you to think about quadrilaterals. So we have listed across the top, we have quadrilateral, parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus, square, and trapezoid. All of those are checked because they have four sides. Some of them are checked because they have two pairs of parallel sides. So there has to be two pairs, not just one pair, but two pairs of parallel sides. Parallelograms have that. Rectangles have that, rhombuses have that, and squares have that. Then the next category we're looking at is the right angles. Certain types of quadrilaterals have four right angles. There's only two of them that have four right angles. To be a rectangle, it has to have four right angles. To be a square, it has to have four right angles. The last quality of it is four equal sides. There are two quadrilaterals that have to have four equal sides. That's a rhombus and a square. And again, this page might help you as a reference as we go ahead and attempt to try and solve these next three problems. So let's take a look at this sheet and see if we can answer it. Why is each statement below true? So these statements are true. But why are they true? A rhombus is always a parallelogram, but a parallelogram is not always a rhombus. Now just sitting there looking at that, you're like, I don't know. Well, let's go back and look. So a rhombus is always a parallelogram, because a parallelogram, to be a parallelogram, it has to have two pairs of opposite sides parallel. Does a rhombus have one pair right here? Let me get my pen, maybe it would be easier. We've got one pair of parallel sides here and here, and we've got another pair of parallel sides here and here. So a rhombus is always going to be a parallelogram. But will a parallelogram always be a rhombus? Will a parallelogram always be a rhombus? No, because I could actually look at this example alone and think about a parallelogram. A parallelogram can be much longer or taller than that, as long as it has two pairs of equal sides. If I drew a parallelogram that was quite long, oops, and drew another one just as long, I'm trying to stay parallel. This one a little bit longer. So is that parallelogram also a rhombus? No, because a rhombus has to have four equal sides. So a rhombus can always be a parallelogram because a rhombus has two sets of parallel sides. But a parallelogram is not always a rhombus because it has to have two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel, and it has to have 4 equal sides. So we know that statement is true, okay? A rhombus is always going to be a parallelogram because to be a parallelogram, you just have to have two sets of parallel sides. But a parallelogram is not always going to be a rhombus because if you draw yourself a nice long parallelogram, that does not mean it's going to have 4 equal sides, so it will not always be a rhombus. All right, you catching on? Number 2, a rectangle is a parallelogram, but a parallelogram is not necessarily a rectangle. A rectangle is a parallelogram because for it to be a parallelogram, it just has to have two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel. And this has parallel here and here, and it has a parallel line running here and here. So it has two pairs of parallel lines. So a rectangle will always be a parallelogram. But will a parallelogram always be a rectangle? Well, this one definitely is not a rectangle. That parallelogram does not qualify as a rectangle because for it to be a rectangle, it has to have 4 right angles, like this one. Right angle, right angle, right angle, and right angle. This parallelogram has no right angles. So, yes, a rectangle is always a parallelogram, but a parallelogram can sometimes be a rectangle if my parallelogram would stand up straight and have 4 right angles. Okay, so that's question number 2. Question number 3. A square is a rectangle, but a rectangle does not have to be a square. A square is a rectangle. A square is this, because a rectangle says two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel. Well, a square has that. Top and bottom are parallel. Both sides are parallel. And it has to have 4 right angles. 1, 2, 3, 4. So a square is a rectangle. But is a rectangle always a square? No, not this one. Because to be a square, it has to have 4 equal sides. So that's how you start to compare quadrilaterals based on the qualities that make each one unique. So we've answered why all 3 of these are true statements. You're going to do something similar to that here in your lesson in just a couple of minutes. Take a look at this next page, this Venn diagram. And let's see if we can add some things that are qualities of this Venn diagram. I'm looking for any quadrilateral that has to have right angles. Which quadrilaterals have to have right angles? A rectangle has to have 4 right angles. A square has to have 4 right angles. So I'm putting rectangle in here, and I'm putting square in here. Okay. Which quadrilaterals have to have parallel sides? Oh my. Parallel sides, parallel sides, parallel sides, 2 pairs of parallel sides, 1 pair of parallel sides. So in this diagram, this section, they want to know which quadrilaterals have parallel sides. I might have to list them all. A parallelogram. Let me move that out a little bit so it fits. And shrink it down a bit. That's a big word. Parallelogram. Rectangle. Scooch that one down a bit. Square. Whoops. Come on, move up there. A rhombus has to have parallel sides. And so does a trapezoid. Stop. All right, so which ones have right angles and parallel sides? True. A rectangle and a square have to have right angles. Let's check again. They have to have right angles. Rectangle has to have 4 right angles. A square has to have 4 right angles. Does this have to have 4 right angles? Doesn't say. Does this have to have 4 right angles? Nope. Does this one have to have 4 right angles? No. So our rectangle and our square have right angles and parallel sides. Everything else has parallel sides. So there's no quadrilateral that fits over here by itself. There's no quadrilateral that has just right angles, because along with the right angles comes parallel sides. And then these ones have parallel sides but do not have, oh, what about this one? Kind of have those, so square and rectangle get repeated. So these ones have parallel sides but not right angles. These ones, I'm going to pull these two out. There's too much writing in there. Rectangles and squares are right angles and parallel sides. Every other quadrilateral is just parallel sides. This one kind of stands out by itself because it only has one set of parallel sides. A parallelogram and a rhombus have 2 sets of parallel sides. So that's what we're looking at today. We're examining the different quadrilaterals and what makes them a quadrilateral. So watch what I want you to do today. I'm going to take you to Teams, and I'm going to show you your assignment for today. I gave you an assignment, give it a minute, called Quadrilaterals. You're going to open it up. I'm going to show you the student view. Now the directions, let me move this over so you can see. The directions, answer each question. You cannot write on the first page because it's a PDF. You must put your answers on the second page. So let's take a look at that. All right, here's my first page. And it says, using the vocabulary box at the right, this vocabulary box, write the name of the quadrilateral that best describes each figure. Which one describes this? Which one would describe this? Which one fits each of those? Use each word once. You can't repeat a word. You can't repeat one of these. Each one of them will get used just one time. And then describe how it is different from the other quadrilaterals. So if I were doing the first one with you, obviously we look at that one and we know that shape is a what? That's a square. So I'm going to go down here, okay, and I was practicing, so I'm just going to put square. It's not letting me get rid of that. I was practicing today. Hopefully this will work for you tomorrow. So I would write square there, and then how is it different from the other shapes? And I was practicing with triangle just so you could see I said it only has 3 sides. Triangle's not even an option today. So question number 1, it is a square. What is the shape? Write square. How is it different from the other shapes? Well, what makes a square different than the other shapes? 2 sets of parallel sides, 4 right angles, 4 equal sides. So you would describe what makes a square a square. And again, if you need to, you'll head back to the lesson and you'll be able to look at the chart right here to show you how you can answer those questions. So if you need to put the video on pause on this screen while you do your work, that would be fabulous.